In my early childhood, I would spend nearly every day riding my bike. It was a normal summer afternoon when I went out with my friend once when I was 8 years old. We pedaled around the neighborhood, racing each other and stopping for snacks. After a couple of hours, my friend had to go home. I still had some time, so I decided to ride on my own. I took a route that went through a quiet area where the trees lined the streets and the houses were spaced apart. It felt peaceful at first, but soon I noticed a white Volkswagen not far behind me. I didn't think much of it initially. Cars passed by all the time, and I figured it was just another driver out for a leisurely afternoon. But as I continued, I realized that the car was following me. I took a left turn, then a right, trying to shake it off, but the Volkswagen stayed close. I remembered what my dad had taught me about safety and what to do if I felt threatened. I pushed my bike harder, trying to distance myself from the car. Then it stopped beside me. A man stepped out. He was hairy with a scruffy beard and clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in days. He smelled really bad, but I remembered that I didn't want to be rude, so I didn't cover my nose. He stood a bit away from me on the curb and crouched down to my level height and asked if I was okay. I nodded, saying I was fine and just biking, keeping my eyes on him, trying to gauge his intentions. The man went on to say that he was a friend of my parents, and they had told him to find me and drive me to my grandma's house. My grandma had been dead for 5 years now, and I knew that he wasn't who he said he was. I'm not sure if I would have believed him anyways at that age, because I didn't think my parents could possibly be friends with someone who smelled that bad. I called him a liar and then started pedaling again as hard as I could. As I started leaving, the man reached out to try to grab my arm, but I had already put enough distance from him to avoid his grasp. I rode straight home, not checking to see if the car was following me still or not. The only thing I could think about was the man and what could have happened if I hadn't escaped. When I finally burst through the front door, my parents were in the living room. I was shaking and crying as I told them everything. My parents called the police, describing the type of car that I had described. Miraculously, on their way to my house, they passed the white car that had been following me and arrested the smelly guy who was driving. Then they arrived at my house, and after my verification that that was the guy that tried to grab me, the police left with the man. I had no idea what ended up happening to him and what his consequence was. I think my parents knew, but since I was pretty young, they told me to not worry about it and that I would be safe. It was scary when it happened, but looking back, it felt good that the guy had ended up being caught. One summer evening when I was about 9 or 10, a serious accident happened just a couple of blocks from our farmhouse. We weren't home when it occurred, but had heard about it from our neighbors. The next day, curiosity got the best of me, so I asked my mom if I could ride my bike up to the corner where the accident took place. I wanted to check out the area to see if I could see anything that had been left over, and I was also just bored. My mom said yes, but warned me not to go any further. She was hanging laundry on the clothesline outside and kept an eye on me as I pedaled away. Our area was rural and quiet. My brother and I rode our bikes everywhere and always felt safe. When I got to the corner, I hopped off my bike and began to look around at the scattered debris. There were bits of broken glass and a crumpled piece of metal. I didn't know much about cars, but it was fun to look at for some reason. As I poked through the leftover wreckage, I heard a car approaching. It was a dark blue station wagon. The two men inside looked older, maybe in their 40s. I felt uneasy immediately, and then they rolled down the window and called out to me. They asked me which one of them was cuter. I jumped back on my bike, pedaling as fast as I could back to my house, which was less than half a mile away. I glanced over my shoulder and saw them turning the car around to follow me. As I biked down the road, I screamed at the top of my lungs, hoping my mom would hear. Thankfully, she had heard me and was running toward me, her face a mix of confusion and concern. The station wagon was close behind still, but as we neared our driveway, the men hesitated. They must have seen my mom coming closer, because they slammed on the brakes and turned their car back down the gravel road, heading away from us. I didn't stop pedaling until I reached my mom. When I explained, she was understandably shaken. She called the police, who came to get information, but there wasn't much they could do. I told them what I remembered about the car and the men's faces, but there wasn't too much to go off of, so I don't think they ever found them. It was scary that something so dangerous could happen so close to my house, where I had always felt very safe. I live in a busy city and would often ride my bike to get places so that I wouldn't have to deal with traffic, and I just enjoy biking. I had a heavy single-speed bike that was perfect for short trips but would always be a workout when going up hills. One evening, I decided to ride to the grocery store. My route took me through a park, one that I had biked through before and knew well. As I pedaled along the dirt path that ran around the perimeter of the park, I found myself struggling up a hill. The weight of the bike felt particularly burdensome, and I could hear the sound of someone jogging behind me. The rhythmic thud of feet hitting the ground was unmistakable, and it grew louder as they gained on me. Feeling embarrassed by my slow pace, I decided to let the jogger pass. I veered to the right, expecting them to zip by, but they didn't. I kept pedaling, trying to speed up, but the sound of their footsteps stayed right behind me. I didn't want to risk looking behind me while biking up the hill in fear of hitting a rut or rock in the dirt path. I even slowed down a ton, just waiting for them to pass, but they never did. Finally, I pulled off the path and into the grass, ready to turn around and give whoever it was a piece of my mind. But when I turned, I was met with nothing but empty trail. No jogger and no more footsteps, just silence. I looked around, scanning the park for any sign of movement, but there was none. The jogger had vanished. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I was baffled because I was certain I had heard someone right behind me. After a few minutes of standing there, I finally hopped back on my bike and continued to the grocery store. That night, back at home, I started to look up more about the park that I was biking through. Apparently, the park had been built over a cemetery, primarily for the poor. They had moved some bodies, but not all. Estimates suggested there were still around 2,000 remains buried underneath the park. I even found stories from people who claimed to have seen apparitions or felt cold spots while walking through the park at night. It seemed to make sense now that if the park was haunted, that it had something to do with my experience while biking through it earlier that day. I still bike through that park fairly often, but haven't had anything strange happen to me again, although I try to avoid it at night. When I was younger, I would go on many cycling trips. The year after I graduated college, I embarked on a long-distance cycling trip across Australia. I'd cycled through many places and had some strange experiences, but one night stands out in my memory from when I was in Australia. I had been riding for weeks in Western and Southern Australia. Most of my journey was uneventful, filled with the sounds of nature and the rhythm of my bike tires against the dirt roads. On this particular evening, I found myself cycling alongside a pipeline that hugged the highway. As dusk approached, I decided to find a quiet spot to camp. I veered off the dirt road, moving inland. The deeper I went, the more I felt I was leaving civilization behind. I stumbled upon what looked like a small forest, with overgrown ruins peeking through the trees. Stone walls were jutted out from the ground, remnants of houses that had been there long ago. It felt eerie, but also interesting, as if nature had taken the land back from the past. I decided this was a nice spot, so I stopped and set up my tent, ensuring that the area was clear of brush and debris. After a simple pasta dinner, I snuffed out the fire and crawled into my tent. By then, it was around 8 p.m., and darkness had enveloped the forest quickly. I had grown accustomed to camping alone, and nights spent outdoors were nothing new to me. But that night was different. The first thing I noticed was an unsettling silence. Normally, the forest is full of sounds, whether they're comforting or intimidating, but it was dead silent. I lay in my sleeping bag, straining to hear any sound such as crickets, animals, or anything, but there was nothing. Eventually, I heard loud and deliberate footsteps though. I speculated that it was a person. I couldn't think of an animal that made such a distinct walking sound that I knew of. I held my breath, hoping whatever it was wouldn't notice my presence. The intervals between the steps were oddly spaced, like someone was taking their time. I debated between grabbing my torch and confronting whatever was out there, or just sitting in silence. Moments dragged on, filled only by those ominous steps circling my tent. The footsteps continued for most of the night, sometimes fading into the distance, only to circle back. I must have sat there for what felt like hours, gripping my shovel tightly in case I needed to use it. Eventually, exhaustion took over. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, the sun was peeking through the trees, casting light into the tent. Outside, the forest was alive now with sounds I had missed earlier that night, such as birds chirping and leaves rustling in the breeze. I quickly scanned the area for any signs of what happened during the night, but there was nothing. No tracks, no broken branches, no indication that something had circled my tent. It was as if the forest had returned to its natural state, erasing any evidence of the previous night's terror. I hurriedly packed up my gear, shaken but relieved to be moving again. As I cycled back towards the pipeline and the highway, I couldn't shake off the strange feeling of whatever had happened the night before, certain that it wasn't just my imagination. I love riding my bike at night. I would often go for night rides on this trail near my house. I had been on this trail many times and never saw anything strange until this one night. As I was riding, the beam from my bike light sliced through the shadows, illuminating the narrow path ahead. I was biking fast, and as I rounded a bend, something caught my eye. Off to the right of the path, just beyond the tree line, stood a figure. Since I was going pretty fast, it was only visible in my headlight for a split second, but it was a person, their outline barely visible in the darkness. They seemed to just be standing there, motionless. I flew by and questioned if my eyes were playing tricks on me and if I had really seen someone just standing there in the woods. I was a little bit nervous because the trail I was on was just one big loop, with the entrance and exit being the same path. So on my way back out, I would pass by that spot again. As I finished the loop and got back onto the path where I had seen the figure, I was nervous about seeing it again. I didn't even want to see it, and I kept my eyes on the path right in front of me, not daring to look out into the woods when I approached the spot. But I couldn't avoid seeing it this time. In the middle of the trail stood the same figure. This time I could make out a bit more detail. It looked like a man, though it was hard to tell in the dark. He stood there, legs apart, blocking my path. I slowed down, unsure of what to do, but this was the only way out. I had to pass him. I yelled at him to get out of my way, but there was no response. I pushed down on the pedals, hoping to dart past him somehow, but as I got closer, he suddenly lunged towards me. My heart sank as I realized he was trying to push me off my bike. I swerved to the left, almost hitting the trees on the left side of the path. As he tried to grab me or knock me off, I kicked my right leg into him, trying to kick him and push him back away from my bike. I don't know if it was his shoulder or arm, but part of his body made contact with my upper body as he tried to shove me off the trail and off my bike. I'm not even sure how, maybe just crazy adrenaline, but I had managed to stay upright on my bike through all this and not hit the trees on my left as I squeezed past him. I pedaled hard, pumping my legs as fast as I could all the way back home. That night, I warned the authorities about the guy on the path and hoped that maybe he would still be there when they arrived, but I doubted it. I'm not sure if he was trying to mug me or maybe he wanted to steal my bike, but either way, he was crazy enough to try to attack me on foot while I was biking. I still bike that trail all the time, but I always have a firearm with me now just in case. I used to go to Chuck E. Cheese sometimes when I was a kid, and I always enjoyed it. I would play the arcade games and eat the pizza that they had, which was really good. Several of my friends had birthday parties there, and I had one once as well. But my scariest experience happened one time when I went there with my best friend David. I was 7 years old, but I remember it like it was last week. I just remember that we were there on, I believe, a Saturday morning, and we got a bunch of coins and started playing all the arcade games. David's mom took us there, and I was going to David's house to hang out afterwards. After playing arcade games and winning tickets for a while, I remember that I was standing not too far away from the playground area. There was a spot that was basically like a play place that you would see at a McDonald's or Burger King. It was a slide with some monkey bars and tunnels and stuff that you could crawl through. I glanced over and I saw a kid looking through the window of one of the elevated tunnels leading to a slide. He was just staring at me really intensely. The kid was maybe a couple of years older than me and I didn't recognize him. I even looked around wondering if he was staring at me or somebody else, but he was definitely staring right at me and it was really weird. I looked away and then I moved to another area out of view of the kid. After that, I pretty much forgot about it and moved on to some other game. Maybe like an hour later though, I was still in the arcade with David. I remember that I noticed the kid that was staring at me again. He was staring at me once more with the wide eyes and intense stare. I was sure that he was trying to scare me or prank me and was joking around, but it was still really weird. He was standing really far away this time and basically on the complete other end of the arcade. Once more, I decided to just walk away. I went to another area and played a different game there. I thought the kid was pretty strange that was staring at me, but I just did my best to forget about it. And pretty quickly, I was able to. We stayed at the Chuck E. Cheese for maybe another hour or two, I'm not sure exactly. Then David's mom took us back to David's house, which was not that far away from the Chuck E. Cheese. When we got back, David and I mostly hung out in his living room. I'm pretty sure that we just played video games and some other stuff around the house. The next thing I really remember though was at nighttime. My mom was going to come and pick me up pretty soon, but in the meantime, I was in the living room with David, which was at the front of the house. I remember that I looked out of David's front window into the street. By now it was dark out, and I saw what appeared to be the same kid from Chuck E. Cheese standing in the street. He was staring at me once again with wide eyes like before. It was the creepiest thing I had ever seen. David saw him as well, and we both quickly covered the windows with the shades. After that, we didn't look back out of the windows until my mom was there. When I left, I did not see the kid anymore, so he must have gone. I remember telling my mom about it, but she didn't seem too concerned. I think she thought I was exaggerating, or she just didn't think it was that weird. But I still think it was really weird to this day. I'm not sure if the kid was one of David's neighbors. David didn't seem to recognize him. I guess it's still possible though, and to me, that's the only thing that makes sense. Overall, I still don't know why the kid would stare at me like that, especially to stand out in the street at night. It was very strange. Luckily, I never saw that kid again after that. Many years ago, I used to work at a Chuck E. Cheese. This was by far the craziest thing to ever happen. I worked there from the time I was 16 to the time I was 18, and it was a decent job. Over the years, I did a little bit of everything there. One time though, towards the end of my time working there, it was a pretty quiet night. We were closing soon, and there were a few people here and there. As things continued to quiet down even more, I was getting ready to start cleaning things and close up. That's when out of nowhere, I saw this man come out from the hallway that led to the back area. This was clearly for employees only, and this man was not an employee. Right away, I also realized that he was wearing the head to the Chuck E. Cheese mascot. We kept it in a back room where sometimes an employee would dress up as the rat for birthday parties or whatever. Nobody was supposed to be doing that today though. This guy seemed to have snuck into the back and put it on. He started very quickly walking around the arcade area. Even though there were not that many people there, he was still getting a big reaction out of those that were. Another employee and I tried to go over to him and get him to stop. As we approached him, he quickly walked away and we followed. But before we could catch up with him, he then turned and ran back towards the back room. He was sprinting, and so he was able to mostly get away from us. By the time I arrived at the back hallway, I couldn't find the man. However, I did find the Chuck E. Cheese mascot head laying on the ground in front of the rear exit door. I figured the man had left out the back door, and thankfully he didn't steal the rat head. I picked it up and brought it back to the room where we stored it. It was a pretty crazy situation, but I was just glad that the man was gone and everything seemed fine. So at that point, I went back to work for the final 30 minutes or so that we were open. For the next short period of time, things resumed like normal. More people left and it became quieter and quieter. Finally, closing time came, and another one of my coworkers left. Now it was just me and another coworker. I went over and made sure that the place was empty, which it was, and then I went over and locked the doors. After that, I headed to the back room to clock out. When I arrived back there though, I passed by the room where we kept the rat costume. I thought that I saw movement out of the corner of my eye when passing by it. I assumed it was probably one of my coworkers and kept walking, but immediately I just had a bad feeling. Maybe it was because of the guy from earlier, but I felt like I should check and make sure. So I backed up and then went to the doorway of the room. I looked inside and saw the same man was there. He was crouched down half behind a table and looking right at me, wearing the rat head once again. It was one of the creepiest things I've ever seen. I told the man to stop, and when I did, he got up and then quickly started running in my direction. I moved back, not knowing what he was doing. The man then ran right past me and back out towards the arcade. I walked back over there, nervous of what the man could do. He started running around the entire place. I yelled at him and threatened to call the police, but it seemed to have no effect on him. I had one other coworker there with me who seemed stunned at what was going on. The man ran around for probably 2 or 3 minutes. Then he finally went to the front door, opened it up, and ran out, taking the rat head with him. We were relieved that he was gone. After that, we were able to go home a short time later. I remember that several days after that, the rat head part of the costume was found a few blocks away in an alley. I never saw the man again. I remember one time when I was a kid, I went to a birthday party at a Chuck E. Cheese. It was for one of my friends, Jaden. We weren't best friends or anything, but in the same friend group. On the day of the party, I was dropped off at the local Chuck E. Cheese by my parents. There were maybe 10 or 12 kids there total at the party. A few of the other children's parents were staying at the party the entire time, and they sat at the tables. After presents and some pizza, us kids were free to roam around the place and do what we wanted. We each got a bunch of coins to play the games with. Most of the kids split up, and I remember that I played countless arcade games over the next hour or so. Then, for a while, I was playing skee-ball by myself in the corner. That was probably my favorite game, and there wasn't really anybody else that was close to me. That was when I remember being approached by a woman. She called me by my name and said that we were leaving. Immediately, I assumed her to be one of the kids' parents. I figured she was helping out with the party and that we were leaving. So I said okay, and then she told me to follow her, so I did. We walked through the arcade, and then went towards the front of the Chuck E. Cheese. The next thing I knew, we were walking right out the front doors. Now, I didn't see any other kids or parents. I'm not really sure why, but at the time, I just didn't think much of it. We walked outside and into the parking lot out front. As we started to walk towards the vehicles, I still wasn't thinking much of it. I guess I figured maybe everyone else had already left the Chuck E. Cheese. Or maybe I was just not thinking of possible scenarios because I was a little kid. Either way, we had made it quite a ways into the parking lot when I suddenly heard voices yelling from back near the Chuck E. Cheese. I looked back and saw some other parents. They were yelling stuff like, "Where are you going?" and "Come back." At first, I was just really confused and didn't know what they were yelling about. But that's when the woman that I was with grabbed me by the arm forcefully. She then started pulling me along with her, and that's when I realized something was up. I heard more shouting, and my instincts finally kicked in that I should get away from this woman. As she pulled me along by the arm, I suddenly tugged away from her. To that point, I hadn't tried to get away, so I was able to take her by surprise, and she let go. At that point, I turned around and ran back towards the Chuck E. Cheese. Several other parents were already running towards me. I ran to them and then looked back and saw the woman now running to a car, and she quickly got inside. The car drove away really fast, and I remember the tires squealing as it did. Then we went back inside the Chuck E. Cheese. I remember that the police were called, and they arrived a while later. My parents came to the Chuck E. Cheese and picked me up as well. That pretty much ended the party, but I don't really remember anything else beyond that. I'm not sure if the woman was ever located and caught or what. That's the craziest experience from my childhood though. It's crazy to think of how close I came to being kidnapped. I'm grateful to the other parents who noticed me leaving and came out to stop it. This happened almost 10 years ago now. During this time, I had recently graduated from high school. I was in college, but back home for the summer. One of my best friends was a girl named Claire. She worked at a Chuck E. Cheese during this time, and one night she asked me for a ride home from work. I didn't work at the Chuck E. Cheese, but I didn't have anything going on so I could give her a ride, and Claire lived not too far away from me. I think her car was broken or something, but I can't remember exactly. Anyways, she'd been working at the Chuck E. Cheese for a while, and sometimes worked closing shifts. On this night in particular, she was working to close, and told me the time that I should arrive. So that night, I drove my car to the Chuck E. Cheese. It was located on the edge of the part of town that had most of the stores and restaurants and stuff. By now, things were very quiet. There were a couple of businesses next to the Chuck E. Cheese that were now closed, and the parking lot was basically empty. I pulled in and parked my car in a random parking space, and then texted Claire that I had arrived. I was a couple of minutes early, so I didn't expect her to leave right away. As I sat there in the parking lot, I noticed one other person outside. There was a man kind of walking around outside of the Chuck E. Cheese on the sidewalk in front of it. He seemed to just sort of be roaming around. About a minute into waiting, and I got a text from Claire saying that there was a creepy guy who had been at the Chuck E. Cheese, and she asked me if I had seen him. I texted back mentioning the guy in the parking lot, assuming that was him. A short time later, Claire responded, saying that she hoped he would leave and that she would be out in a couple of minutes. I watched the man from my car, and after he paced around the front of the Chuck E. Cheese, he sort of stopped and then looked over at me. When he saw me, he just started staring at me for a moment or two, and then he started walking in my direction. I got a bad feeling when I saw that and wondered what he was planning to do. The man walked all the way over to my car and then went around to the driver's side right by me and then knocked on the window. I looked and made sure that my doors were locked, and after seeing that they were, I then rolled my window down just barely an inch. The man didn't even say anything to me though. He just tried opening my driver's door, which was locked. When this happened, I rolled the window back up. The man then started banging on my driver's window rather hard, and I didn't know what to do, so I drove away. I hit the gas, leaving the guy standing there in the parking lot. I knew that I had to pick up Claire still, but I needed to get away from the guy. After I left the parking lot, my plan was to circle back around and hope that Claire hadn't left the Chuck E. Cheese building yet. Obviously, I hadn't had a chance to let her know that the guy tried getting in my car, so I drove down a street and then turned around and drove back. When I arrived at the Chuck E. Cheese again, I saw the man was standing right outside of the building. He was knocking on the front door to the building, which I'm assuming was locked. I parked my car in a space again, and then rolled my window down and yelled at the guy to stop. He looked over at me, and I braced myself for what he would do next. But surprisingly, he turned and walked away from the Chuck E. Cheese, not in the direction of my car, but in another direction altogether. I watched the man walk to the side of the parking lot, and then go into a small grass area with some trees separating that parking lot from another one. After the man had basically gone out of sight, I saw Claire walking out of the Chuck E. Cheese. She then started jogging towards my car and looking around. It was like she knew the guy might come back again. When Claire had made it a little more than halfway to my car, that's when I saw the man again. Claire looked behind her for a second and then started running faster. I saw the man emerging from behind a tree and then start full-on sprinting towards us. Claire ran faster and was able to make it to my car and get inside. When she did, the man was still full-on sprinting towards my car and was maybe 40 feet away. I quickly put the car into drive and got out of there. The man was thankfully unable to reach my vehicle, and I left safely. I was able to give Claire a ride home, and we were very glad to escape that guy. After that, I never heard anything more about him being at the Chuck E. Cheese. I'm not sure what he wanted or what he was doing that night, but it was a very crazy experience. Back when I was a teenager, I used to hang out with my friends all the time. One night in the summer, we had gone to a local park and played some pickup football. We would go to the local city park that was a few blocks away and maybe a 15-minute walk from my house. But it was a nice park, and the kids in my neighborhood and I went there quite often. This time, we had played football until past sunset. We knew that we should be getting back home, so we all started to walk back. As we did, a few kids left to go their separate ways after about a block or two. Then it was me and 3 other kids for most of the rest of the way. We walked for several more blocks and then went by a few businesses. There was like a Subway and McDonald's, and then across from that was an old Chuck E. Cheese. It had just recently closed a few months prior. As we walked past, I can't remember whose idea it was, but one of the guys wanted to walk closer to it. So we went in the Chuck E. Cheese parking lot, which was empty. We were just walking around and just joking and stuff. However, we went around to the back of the Chuck E. Cheese for some reason, and it was kind of like a back alley area. We noticed that a door to the Chuck E. Cheese was cracked open. Of course, being teenage boys, we were all very curious and wanted to see what was inside, especially because the place was abandoned. We carefully went to the back door and quietly opened it and went inside. Right after going in, it was mostly dark. However, the Chuck E. Cheese still had a good number of things inside of it. We walked through this hallway and then saw the arcade, and most of the games were still there. It was really crazy to be inside, and I was ready to turn around and leave at any second. We kind of just explored and looked around for maybe 5 minutes or so. Then we suddenly all heard a noise coming from the other side of the building, but inside. Instantly, we all started running back to where we had entered. Nobody said a word, and within 10 seconds probably, we were all near the back hallway. Then we heard footsteps going out into the arcade and moving closer to us. That's when we all scrambled back to the door. One by one, we quickly made our way outside and into the alley again. When we were all outside, we left the door propped open like it had been and then started walking away. We were walking at a fast pace from it to go back to the sidewalk. When we were a good distance away, I remember looking back. I saw this guy open up the door and look towards us. It was dark out, so I didn't get a good look at him at all, but it was very creepy. The guy just stood there, looking in our direction. I don't know why I continued to look at him, but I did. As I was doing so, my friends noticed me looking back, and they stopped and looked as well. It was at that point when the man suddenly slammed the door shut and started walking in our direction. The way he slammed the door made it seem like he meant business. At once, we all just started sprinting. We ran all the way back to the sidewalk, and then kept going all the way to our neighborhood. When we got into the neighborhood, we didn't see the guy and thought that we had lost him. But still, we didn't waste any time and said bye to each other and then went our separate ways. I got home that night and was grateful to have made it back safely. Luckily, none of us saw that man again. We also didn't go back to the Chuck E. Cheese. I regret going into the Chuck E. Cheese that night. We should have just walked past it and went home. The building later turned into an auto zone, which it still is today that I'm aware of. I will never forget that crazy experience. This happened to me when I was about 12. My sister had this dog, a young Jack Russell, and since she was over at a friend's house, I figured I'd take him for a walk. It was around 8 p.m. in early May, and it was still light out, but it would be dark soon. I walked around the corner towards the local park. The dog tugged at his leash, and I made my way up the path and saw something odd. At first, I thought it was a bird. It looked a bit like a partridge, but it had a reddish-brown coloring and a greenish neck. I don't know why, but something about it made me curious. I was just a kid, so I decided to run after it. At first, it didn't move, just stood there. But when I got closer, it darted into the bushes. I hesitated for a moment, but being 12, I was determined to see what it was. I pushed through the bushes trying to follow the bird, but the thorns caught at my skin and clothes. The dog, who was still just a puppy, was pulling still. I had to hold him back because I was afraid that he might get stuck or hurt in the thorns. After a while, I gave up on the bird and started heading towards a nearby field. That's when I started hearing strange noises from the bushes. Not the usual black crow or chickadee noises, but something else. It sounded like a bird, but not a bird that I had heard before. It was high-pitched, almost a whistle. I thought someone was messing around and assumed it to be some kind of a prank. I'd heard people using those foam whistle things to mimic bird calls, so I figured that's all it was. But then the noise changed. It wasn't bird sounds anymore, and it had changed to monkey noises now. The way the noise shifted, it was unmistakably a human trying to sound like a monkey, and I didn't live in an area where wild monkeys were a thing. I stopped walking for a moment and looked around, but all I could see were bushes. I started to move towards the exit of the park. The dog was tugging harder now, as if it could sense something was wrong. That's when I noticed somebody standing in the bushes, partially hidden. They were wearing a blue coat, and I could barely make out his face, but there was something about the way he stood there, just watching me, that made me freeze. I couldn't tell if it was a man or someone else, but I knew I didn't want to find out. I thought I might have imagined it, so I told myself to calm down and I kept walking, but the dog was acting weird. He started tugging harder and whining and barking, but not his usual playful bark. It was frantic, almost desperate. I took his collar to try to calm him down, but he bit at it like he was trying to get away from me, which was unlike him. When I let go of the leash for a second, he lunged at me, trying to bite my hand. Not a playful nip, but like he was genuinely trying to hurt me. It didn't break my skin, but it scared me. I don't know what was going on with him, but it felt wrong. At that point, I was freaked out enough that I decided it was time to leave. I started walking quickly towards the path that led out of the park, the dog pulling me faster. Just as I turned back to head for the exit, I looked over my shoulder and I saw the person in the blue coat again behind me. I began speed walking towards the exit of the park, but that's when I saw another person coming towards me from the other side of the park. He was wearing a bright red coat, and he was moving fast, way too fast for someone just out for a walk. I didn't think, I just ran. I ran as fast as I could, having to find an exit through the wooded tree area of the park, since the other people were blocking my path. I didn't stop until I was safely at my back door. When I got inside, I locked the door and ran up from my bedroom. I was shaking by then, but I felt a little safer in the house. I needed to make sure I was okay, so I peeked out of my window just to see if anybody was out there. When I looked out of the window, I saw the people in the red and blue coat walking down the street together now. They were scanning yards and staring for long periods of time into people's windows and backyards as they walked by. I think they were looking to see where I lived, but thankfully, I slipped in through the back door and they had no idea which house I lived in. I shut the curtain to my room, and I didn't dare look outside again as they'd be out in front of my house soon. I've never felt that scared again, and I never went back to that park alone after dark. Often, I enjoy walking my dog at nighttime. This is due to the fact that my dog is harder to walk when people are around with their own dogs. So we tend to walk around parks in the area when they've become somewhat secluded. Personally, being a smaller guy, I don't think I'm an intimidating figure. However, my 120-pound dog named Loki could be somewhat considered threatening to most. I figured his size would be used as a deterrent for anybody looking to cause trouble at night, but I was wrong. On one specific night, I had an encounter that reminds me why I'm so reluctant to walk around in the dark now. The park is one that I've been to a couple of times and is usually secluded around 7 p.m. and later. Aside from a couple of joggers or very few other dog walkers, not many people walk on the same path I take. I also like to put in my headphones and listen to music while I walk, but on this specific night, I chose not to wear them since my phone was on low battery and I wanted to preserve it as long as I could. Anyways, the walk was going as usual. Loki did his business and we continued on our usual path. About midway through the walk, I realized that it had started to get really dark. Since he was almost done with his business, I decided to cut the walk somewhat short, and we took a shortcut that kind of led us off the path. This path had a bunch of trees surrounding the area, and there were still leaves on the branches. As we walked, I got a weird feeling as if I were being watched. I have pretty bad anxiety sometimes, but since I knew the town was safe, I knew that nothing was going to happen. But still, I could not shake off the feeling that I was being watched. I peered back to see if anybody had been following me out of anxiety, and every time, no one was there. In fact, no one was anywhere, as the whole shortcut was essentially secluded. Suddenly, Loki stopped walking and also looked back. One thing I failed to mention is that Loki is a big coward. I noticed his tail was tucked between his legs, which is a telltale sign that a dog is afraid. I was also curious and a bit nervous, but I surely did not want to find out what he heard or noticed. I just wanted to get home fast. I pulled a little and he began to walk, but every now and then I'd see him peer back. After maybe a minute or so of walking, he stopped again, and this time he began to growl. I used my phone's flashlight to see what he was growling at. All I could see was just trees though, and I assumed what he heard was probably some kind of a small animal. Once again, I turned around and kept walking. He continued to peer back once in a while still, but this time I noticed it was a lot more frequent. Finally, I heard what appeared to be actual footsteps and branches breaking. There's absolutely no way a small animal could have produced a sound like that. Loki turned around quick, and still with his tail tucked, he began to growl and bark at a man in his early 50s who had come out of the woods. He was dressed in dirty clothing, his hair was long and graying. He had one hand in his pocket, and he said to me, "Hey, nice dog, can I pet it?" The man got closer and emerged from the trees. Loki instantly got bad vibes, and he ran behind me and started to bark at the man. I stated that it probably wasn't a good idea since Loki was acting so weird, and I didn't want to scare him more. I felt extremely uncomfortable as the man appeared to get closer and closer. I didn't know why this guy couldn't take no for an answer. I mean, I usually don't allow people to pet Loki unless he comes up to them first. If he's scared of you, then I usually don't want to freak him out by letting him be pet by a stranger. This is especially the case when it's a stranger who came out of the woods behind a few trees. I told the man I was sorry and that I didn't want him to get bit, so I began walking away. This seemed to anger the man. This time, I sped walked as my fight or flight instincts began to take over. He followed us and kept muttering curses to himself. I don't know if this man was under the influence of something, but he did not let up. He began to match my speed, almost as if he was trying to catch up to us. Loki and I both looked at this as a sign to start sprinting a bit. I remember the spine-tingling feeling of hearing the man's footsteps rapidly increasing behind me as we ran away. For a man of his stature, he was quite fast. I also realized that his intentions may not have been just to pet my dog. No one reasonably would go that far just to pet a dog that clearly wanted nothing to do with them. I looked behind me as he was in pursuit, maybe about 10 feet behind us. I'll never forget the look in his eyes. I've never had anyone look at me like that. My instincts told me that he definitely had sinister intent. Finally, the path led us to the park exit and into the busier streets, and the man stopped chasing me at the edge of the woods. I lived about 10 minutes away from the park and made sure that no one was following me and stayed on populated streets. I made a police report, since after all, this guy seemed to have been quite suspicious, and who knows what his true intentions were. Had his target been somebody who couldn't protect themselves or run away, what could he have done? I also often ask myself what might have happened if I had worn my headphones that night and didn't hear him at all. Ever since, I haven't walked Loki in that park. I've also made it a habit of mine to walk on livelier streets at night. I had an experience recently that I haven't been able to shake. I was dog sitting for my boyfriend while he was away on a trip. My boyfriend's home is in a semi-remote area at the bottom of a hill at the back of a few acres of property. He's right next to the highway, and across the highway is a small rural neighborhood. It's an odd community, as people frequently keep to themselves, and there are lots of abandoned, rundown homes right next to the very well-kept homes. It was in this neighborhood that I had agreed to watch my boyfriend's property and his dog named Hennessy. Hennessy is a 115-pound bulldog and Labrador mix. He's basically all muscles, and ever since my boyfriend and I began dating, he's become very protective of me and my own dog, Lottie. My dog, Lottie, is very much the opposite of Hennessy, being a 57-pound poodle mix. When I was dog sitting, I also brought my own dog over to my boyfriend's house. I cannot walk Hennessy and Lottie at the same time because of how much Hennessy pulls, so I usually walk Lottie alone and then go back to Hennessy to walk him alone. We do about 30 minutes of walking each, and I like to take Hennessy after Lottie at night because I feel safer with him as it gets later. One night while I was dog sitting, I was about halfway through my walk with Lottie when I got this really weird feeling that I was being watched. I looked around to see about 30 feet or so back, there was a tall man in a hoodie standing next to an older, run-down home. I instantly thought the hoodie was weird. It didn't get colder than 87 degrees in the evening where we were, especially when the sun was still setting like it was at the time. As we walked, the sun continued to set, and the streets began to slowly get darker. I would glance back from time to time, and notice that the man was keeping pace with me. Finally, we reached the highway, and I crossed right before a car came speeding past, hoping to slow the guy down. This put some distance between us now, but it didn't stop him from continuing to follow me. I walked as fast as I could to the house, now being able to hear his footsteps on the gravel. I made it back inside the house, slammed and locked the door, hoping that was the end of it. But it was not. Moments after I'd shut and locked the door, I felt somebody trying to open it. The dogs heard this too and started barking, because they always do when someone's at the door. There's no people on the door, but I can talk to whoever's on the other side since it's a thin door. So I yelled out and asked who was there. Through the barking, I heard a man's voice say, "I love your dog. Can I meet it?" I yelled back no through the door and asked him to please go away. He started trying the door handle again, this time pushing up against the door. By that point, my dogs could tell something was wrong. The hair on the back of Hennessy's neck was standing up, and he mashed his teeth while growling. At that moment, I don't know why I made this decision, and I probably shouldn't have, but it worked out. I threw Lottie into the bathroom behind me and grabbed Hennessy by the collar, keeping him close to the door with me. I unlocked the door and opened it just wide enough that Hennessy could go about halfway out. He was going crazy at that point, and my hand started to hurt from holding him back. I heard his teeth clack as he ferociously chomped towards the man. This man was clearly not expecting a big dog, since I had taken a small dainty one on a walk. He stumbled back, almost falling over as he scrambled away. He didn't even look at me and instead booked it up the hill as fast as he could and out of sight. I managed to pull Hennessy back inside, and I called the cops to tell them what had happened. I never got a good look at the guy, but they basically told me there wasn't anything they could really do. I don't know why the man didn't get the hint when I had 2 dogs barking inside, but my assumption is that he didn't really realize he was hearing 2 barks. Maybe he assumed if I had 2 dogs, they would both be like my poofy poodle. Looking back, I probably should have just called the cops and kept my door closed. However, I hope that he never comes back now thanks to Hennessy. It was the summer of my senior year in high school, and I was living in a small town, working and going to school. One of my good friends, Emma, asked if I would be interested in house and dog sitting for her family for a week. They were going up to Northern California to visit some relatives. I was going to get paid, and since I didn't have anything else planned, I agreed. The house was only about 10 to 15 minutes from mine, so it wasn't really an inconvenience. Emma's family had 3 dogs, and I'd been over to her house multiple times, so I knew the dogs well and I figured it would be a relaxing week. The first couple of days went smoothly. Nothing weird happened. I went to work every day, then came back to their house to take care of the dogs, fed them, let them outside, and so on. Then, on the 3rd day, I worked a late shift, from 1 to 9 p.m. After work, I drove over to Emma's house like usual. It was already dark by the time I pulled into their driveway. As I turned in, I saw something that immediately shocked me. The 3 dogs were in the street just wandering around near the driveway. The garage door was wide open, and the front door was also open. My first thought was that I had forgotten to close the garage door when I left, and thankfully all the dogs were there. I parked in the driveway and jumped out of my car. The dogs looked up at me, wagging their tails, and I quickly got them all back into the house. I shut the front door behind me and locked it. Then I went to the garage door, which was still open, and shut that too. The dogs were acting completely normal also. As I went through the house, I noticed all the doors were open, and I mean every single one. The side door to the kitchen, the back door, and even all the doors upstairs to bedrooms and such. Every single window was also wide open. That's when I realized that this wasn't from me absent-mindedly forgetting to close the front door and garage door before I left. I called the police. I told them that I wasn't sure what was going on, but all the doors had been left open and it seemed weird. When the officers arrived, they searched the house room by room, but found nothing out of place. Later that week, on the last day that I was house sitting for Emma's family, I came back from work again to find the exact same scenario. All the doors and windows in the house were wide open. I called the cops once again, and again they didn't find anybody inside. I was very scared now, especially after having it happen again. So I took care of the dogs and left for the night, not wanting to sleep in the house. Emma's family came back the next day, and for the rest of the time that they lived there until moving out a couple of years later, they never had anything like that happen to them. This happened to me a couple of years ago when my husband and I were living in a townhouse in a pretty decent area. My husband was working that night, and it was an unusually warm night for mid-March, so I took advantage. I decided to take our 80-pound Siberian Husky mixed dog on a quick walk around the neighborhood near our complex. We got to the end of the street that leads into the complex we live in, and across the street is a gas station. As the dog Luke stopped to relieve himself, I saw there was a guy across the street at the gas station with a case of beer in his hands. I had my phone out texting a friend, and looked back up to notice that the guy was near the stop sign, also relieving himself. I felt really awkward and instantly put my phone away and led Luke down the street on our path. At the point this guy noticed us, he crossed the street to where Luke and I had just been. I heard him walking a few feet behind me. After about 10 seconds, I heard the guy's steps getting closer. Luke realized that there was somebody behind us and he stopped in his tracks. I was glad that he was aware of our surroundings, but I still wanted him to keep moving and get away from this guy. The guy was clearly drunk, and I just had a bad feeling about him. The man finally caught up, so I tightened my grip on Luke's leash. I pulled him closer to me as I stepped into the grass to allow the guy to pass us. However, instead of passing us, the man decided to stop even with us on the sidewalk. He stopped and just stared at me for a minute. long enough for me to smell the cigarettes and booze coming from him, and also to notice that he was probably in his mid to late 20s with dark hair and that he was just dirty. He smiled and then finally seemed to notice Luke. He then proceeded to ask me if he could pet my dog, and before I could even give him an answer, he leaned down to start petting Luke's head. Luke didn't like that and jumped at him as a warning, and the guy backed up while he chuckled. The man then started asking questions like what my name was and where I lived. Obviously, I gave him a fake name and said that I was just in town for the week. The man then made a sudden step towards me. I've never heard our dog growl in the 5 years that we've had him, but the sound that came from my dog sounded like something from nightmares. Luke had put himself completely between me and the guy while snapping at him. This freaked the dude out so much that he stumbled backwards, nearly dropping his beer. He resorted to saying, "Have a good night, cutie," and then stumbled down the road. Our dog is the sweetest and most gentle creature I've ever met, and to have him growl and react like he did, it gave me a very bad feeling about the man.
So, not long ago, I decided to go fishing down by my house at a river I hadn't fished in before. It's in a patch of woods right next to a park that's known for having a lot of homeless people camping out there. I'd been meaning to check it out for a while, so I figured now was as good of a time as any. I walked along the riverbank looking for a good spot. After a few minutes of searching, I came across this huge camp tucked away in the trees. It was some kind of big hut made from sticks, and it was packed with empty liquor bottles. I didn't want to get too close, but as I walked by, I noticed a little Spider-Man fishing pole lying in the dirt and a hatchet leaning against one of the logs. When I walked by, I didn't see any homeless people around, and I kept going to find a better spot further down the river. Eventually, I found a good place to fish. The river's pretty quiet there, and I thought I could sit for a while. The fishing was slow, so I ended up just propping my pole up against a tree and started looking around. After a few minutes, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. When I turned my head, I saw a guy walking slowly towards me. At first, I thought he might be another fisherman or someone out for a walk, but then I saw what he was holding. It was the hatchet I had seen earlier from the homeless camp. The guy was wearing a long black coat, even though it wasn't that cold out, and he had a scraggly gray beard. I thought about what I should do, but all I had on me was a little 3-inch gutting and cleaning knife. I wasn't going to stand a chance if it came down to a fight with that tiny knife against a hatchet. The guy kept coming towards me, moving slow and steady, and he didn't seem friendly at all. I felt like my legs were made of lead, but I managed to stumble over to my tackle box and start shoving my gear inside as fast as I could. I grabbed everything, shoved it into the box, and started backing away, trying to keep the guy in my sight. I could hear him yelling something, but it was all garbled. It sounded like he was shouting at me, but I wasn't about to stop and listen. As I turned and started running, I heard him scream something again, but I didn't wait around. I wasn't about to give him a reason to come after me. I ran all the way back to the main road, and by the time I hit the pavement, I didn't stop until I got to my car. I've never gone back to fish there since. I think most likely the man was just trying to scare me off, since he probably fished there and viewed it as his personal fishing area. I don't blame the guy since he might be sustaining himself from the fish he catches if he's desperate. However, desperate people do desperate things, and I wasn't going to stick around as a homeless guy approached me screaming with a hatchet. I am an avid fisherman, and I love going for catfish. I also love to fish at night when it's peaceful and quiet. I tend to stay out extremely late on non-work nights, so that leads me to why I was at a lake at night, experiencing what I did. I forget what day of the week it was, but I was alone. My girlfriend at the time didn't want to come with, and I couldn't convince anyone else to come with me either. So I grabbed my gear and my gun and went to fish for a few hours on my own. It was going well, and I got a few catfish, but while I was fishing, I kept hearing talking, yet I couldn't see anyone. I figured maybe they were just walking down the road, and I paid it no mind. Fast forward a few hours, and I heard a whistle. The lake I was at is a city lake, and it has walking paths that are well lit. I looked around, but I didn't see or hear anything further. I resumed fishing, and then I heard another whistle, this time to my right. I was thinking to myself that it was probably some kids, but this was an attention-seeking whistle, like one that someone would do if they wanted your attention. Again, I didn't see or hear anything, so I went back to fishing. I heard a third whistle, this time from behind me, and I'd had enough now, so I decided to go investigate this time. I put my hand on my gun and I quietly walked around the building nearby. Nothing was there, and I didn't hear anyone else as well. This seems impossible that I wouldn't hear someone walking around, since there's gravel everywhere, but as I turned around to walk back, directly behind me I heard a very loud and shrill whistle. It sounded close enough and loud enough to make me flip around and draw my gun, but still nothing was there. My heart was pounding at this point, so I grabbed my stuff and booked it to my car. Fast forward a week later, when I was with a friend and I went to the same lake. I had already put the whistling from the previous solo trip out of my mind. We started fishing and we were having a decent time. As I looked around throughout the night, I kept noticing shadows in the trees across the lake. It almost looked like something was running near the lights and jumping around. I didn't think much of it and figured that the night was playing tricks on me. My friend, who didn't tell me until later that night, also observed the exact same thing. It was getting close to 3 a.m. now and we heard some people chatting. We couldn't see anyone, which was odd because the lake is kind of like a pit with roads all around, and it's impossible not to see someone walking by. We were kind of sketched out, but we kept fishing because it was going well. Around 3:15 a.m., I began to hear birds tweeting. I turned to my friend and said, "You hear birds chirping? Kind of odd for 3 a.m. He looked around, kind of looking paranoid, and then 5 to 10 minutes later he said, "Those aren't birds chirping, someone's mimicking them." I looked at my friend, kind of strange, and then he went on to tell me a story his coworker had told him. It was about incidents of people dying here, and why the city doesn't let anyone swim in the lake now. As soon as he finished his story saying that people have died at the lake, the crickets stopped, and the wind died down immediately, and the fish stopped biting completely. We looked at each other and asked if we felt strange, and we both agreed that we should pack it up and head out. As we were leaving, the tweeting started back up again, and we quickly went back to the car. My friend suddenly flipped around with his knife drawn, and I instinctively pulled my gun. He yelled that we needed to leave now, and we scrambled to the car and drove off. Once we were on the road, I asked my friend why he pulled his knife like that, and he stated that something was running behind him like it was charging at the both of us. I have no idea what's up with that lake, and what happened those 2 nights that I was there, but even thinking about it gives me the chills. That night really scared me badly. Something wasn't right, and we both knew it. I was fishing at this quiet lake up north one morning. It was about 5 a.m., still dark out, and I was getting in an early session before work that day. I liked fishing at this spot because it was always so calm. Nobody was around, just the sound of water and birds waking up. There was a shower facility by the lake, mostly for people camping or staying nearby, and I usually used it to take a shower after fishing before heading out for work. As I walked over to the building, I noticed someone was already inside one of the individual stalls. The door was cracked and I could hear the water running. I didn't think much of it, and I figured maybe someone was just getting an early start too. But when I got closer, I saw something that made me stop in my tracks. There was a man, and he was standing just outside the shower area. He was sort of leaning against the wall, wiping his hands off on his clothes. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I saw the blood. There was blood on his shirt and his hands. It was like he had been in some kind of a mess. And it wasn't just a little, it was a lot of it soaked through his clothes. He didn't seem to notice me at first, and I wasn't sure what to do. Should I ask if he needed help? Maybe he was hurt, or also a fisherman and had been gutting fish and it got messy. He didn't act strange though. He just walked over to the shower area like it was completely normal. The only thing strange he did was stare me down as he walked in and shut the door behind him to his stall. I had wanted to ask him if he was alright, but that stare down had stopped me from saying anything. It was like a death stare. I figured, okay, maybe I'm overthinking it. People get weird sometimes, maybe it's just a weird coincidence. I went into a stall to take a quick shower and tried to shake it off, but I couldn't stop thinking about that guy and how he had gotten so bloody. When I finished my shower, the man was already gone. About 20 minutes later, when I was packing up my gear to leave, I noticed a couple of cars pulling in. 2 guys got out, both wearing FBI jackets. They didn't look like the usual cops you see around. These guys looked serious, like they were there for something big. One of the agents came over to me and asked if I had seen anyone around the shower facility that morning or lake that morning. I told him about the man I had seen, described what he looked like, and mentioned the blood. He didn't seem too surprised, but he asked a lot of questions. Before the cops, investigators, or whoever they were left, I asked really quick what was going on. They told me that the guy they were looking for who I saw had killed his wife, daughter, and his daughter's friend who had been staying over. They had found the bodies in their house earlier that morning after a disturbance phone call from a neighbor, and had been looking for that guy for a few hours now. It still blows my mind. It was so normal the way he acted, like nothing was wrong. I would have never guessed that I'd end up in the middle of something like that. I just can't shake the image of him standing there covered in his family's blood like it was no big deal. This happened 3 years ago when I was 17 years old. It was the summer and my friends and I only had part-time jobs, so we used to go fishing whenever we could. Throughout the summer break, we explored many different rivers and lakes looking for the best spots to fish. Usually we would encounter animals or people, but nothing special. None of us had our own cars at that point in our lives, so we would usually take a bus to a location or just walk to it. One day, my friends and I were on a bus and went to a city not too far away. We arrived to the city, and before we left the bus, an old creepy drunk guy said something along the lines of good luck on fishing. He asked us which spot we were headed to, and we didn't think anything about it at the time, so we told him the name of the lake we were going to fish. The only thing the man said was, "Well, good luck, I hope you catch some fish." Anyways, we arrived at the lake, which was very beautiful, and started fishing. At around 1:30 p.m., after we had some beers, we could hear some arguing in the distance. Since we had a large group of people, we weren't really scared. A friend and I went to investigate the arguing while the others stayed near the fishing spot. Upon arriving towards where the noise had come from, we spotted the same old drunk guy from the bus earlier. He was crawling in the grass and kind of trying to hide in a bush. We asked him what he was doing, to which he replied he was hunting. We did not see any weapon on him whatsoever, so I proceeded to ask him what he was hunting without a weapon. He got up and said to us in his exact words, "Look, this is a coincidence and I'm going to get going." Then he started stumbling away. We returned to our group and continued enjoying our fishing. A few hours later now, at around 4 p.m., we heard somebody angrily shouting in the distance again. We turned and looked towards the voices and spotted this buff guy in a black shirt covered in tattoos. Behind him was the same old guy from earlier. The buff guy yelled out, "What do you think you're doing on my property?" We, of course, didn't know that this was someone's property since we were not from this city and it looked like a public lake. We apologized to the man and said we would leave immediately. Some of our friends had already even packed up and were walking away towards the bus stop. It was my friend and I still left, trying to wrap up the conversation with this buff guy so we could leave. However, this guy was not content with our apology and seemed to want something more, I guess. He told us that we had to call our friends and tell them to come back, or else the two of us weren't leaving. I, of course, did not want to call our friends or stick around these two strange guys any longer, especially since he was threatening us now. We had been quietly fishing, doing nothing to disturb anyone, and the lake was a long ways from any houses regardless. The buff man seemed to be going way over the top with how he was acting, especially since we were actively trying to leave and get off the property. My friend eventually stopped the pointless back and forth talking with the buff guy. He told him that we were leaving now and he started to walk away. Now this is where it gets scary. The buff dude grabbed my friend around his neck and he started arguing with him, saying he was not going anywhere. I wasn't just going to watch this guy chokehold my friend, so I jumped in and hit the guy in the face. He let go of my friend and chased after me. After I ran for about a minute, the dude got tired and gave up. So I ended up leaving the woods and went onto the street. I waited on a bench for some time and then saw my other friend coming out of the woods as well. He sat next to me and told me that when the dude started chasing me, the old guy who had still been there quiet the whole time had tried to jump on him with a hunting knife. He thankfully missed my friend, who was able to push the old man away from him and run away as well. We called the cops after that, and had met up with our other friends who had started to come back for us because we were taking so long. A patrol came and we gave our statement. The cops explained to us that the part where we had been was close to private property, but where we were was actually public land and we were allowed to be there. So that piece of information, again with the fact that the guy grabbed my friend around the neck and the older man had a knife, was definitely not how they should have handled the situation. I don't even know if those guys were the owners of the private property, or if they were just some thugs trying to rob us or something. I'm not sure. We ended up getting home safely, and nowadays we laugh at the story whenever it gets brought up. This happened a few years ago when I was in high school. My grandparents on my mom's side rented out a large cabin in a campground near the Canadian border for a bunch of my family to go on a weekend fishing trip. It was an actual campground, but it had a large restaurant and gift shop area. There were 5 cabins, each about 150 to 200 feet apart, and each of them were about 500 feet from the lake we were on. In between the lake and cabins were fire pits. The fire pits and seats were dug into the ground, so you had to use stairs to get in and out of them easily. They were also facing the lake, away from the cabins, which means if you were sitting by the fire pit, it was impossible to see the cabin, and vice versa, impossible to see the people by the fire pit. The cabins were big, but with 14 people, and myself being one of the only girls, I ended up on the futon in the living room. Saturday night, after a long day of fishing on the lake, most of my family was around the fire pit. I was exhausted, however, so I skipped the fire and was laying on my futon. My 11-year-old cousin was the only other person inside the cabin, sitting on the chair next to me playing on his phone. The lights were off in the cabin, and it was getting just past dusk outside. I heard the sliding glass door open, and I looked up to see a man step inside. I couldn't see the man's features too well because it was dark in the cabin, and the little light that was coming from inside was backlighting this person, so the only thing I saw was a silhouette. I immediately recognized that this person wasn't a member of my family. He stepped into the house and started picking up stuff off the table, looking at it and setting it back down. I sat up on the futon and he looked at me. I called out to the man and all I said was, "Sir," but he didn't answer. He took a few more steps towards me, and I just remember wishing that my little cousin wasn't there to witness this if something bad was about to happen. The chair my cousin was sitting in was facing away from the door. I don't even think the man saw him in there with me. The man paused, and I called out again as I scooched back on the futon. No response from the man, and he started walking towards me again. I got myself ready for the worst, even though I had no weapons, basically just getting ready to fight and scream if he came at me. Suddenly, a girl my age appeared in the open glass door. She yelled to the man, "Dad, this isn't our cabin." She sounded out of breath like she had just ran to the door. The man didn't say anything, only turned around and followed her out to a different cabin. I made my cousin go out to the fire pit with me and join our family after that. My cousin had had his headphones in and heard nothing during the whole interaction. I believe that man must have honestly been in the wrong cabin, and maybe thought I was his daughter, but it was so strange. My only guess is the man had some sort of disorder or dementia, because why would he have not answered me when I spoke to him or said anything at all? Even if it was just a simple accident, it gave me the worst scare of my life. I felt so helpless with no weapon nearby as he approached me.